Our next speaker brings a lot of personal perspective and insight, and it is Major Simon Mailloux from the Canadian Armed Forces. So, Major Mailloux, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, hello. I think I will start right now. There you go. The video's popped in. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. First and foremost, appreciate very much the invitation from the RCSC, ICRC, and the Ball City School inside Wilfrid Laurier University for this invitation to speak to you very quickly about my experience with disability. As you may have seen from my biography, I am a serving Canadian Forces officer from an infantry background. I have been deployed to Afghanistan twice and to Ukraine once. My experience with disability is not only inside conflicts, seeing other people's injured, but I got injured myself through an ID improvised explosive device. Let me share a bit of my story for a few minutes to put some context on the points I want to make after that. Hopefully I've listened to all the great speakers that were there before. My background is not so much academic, as you may know. It is more experience and operational. So let me share that frankly with you, what I've lived through, and maybe some points of thoughts at the end. That's my aim really this morning. I was a platoon commander in 2007, in November of 2007. I was deployed in Afghanistan to provide security and development to communities over there. Unfortunately, my vehicle blew up on an improvised explosive device, an IED. And during the event, two of my soldiers were killed in action, along with one of my interpreters. I got injured myself, along with two other soldiers. It was a catastrophic loss, many of us injured. So much so that I got repatriated back to Canada through Germany, and they had to amputate my left leg through the knee, which is you would say something that usually puts a damp on your career, and it really provoked a lot of thinking about what I wanted to do. But I really had the desire to keep serving in the Canadian Armed Forces, and although it was something that was not very possible back then, the Canadian Forces made changes and provided policy that I could keep serving in a meaningful manner. So I underwent rehabilitation for months and months at the time. Got fitted with a prosthetic. It took a long time for me to climb back to that. But in November 2009, so basically 2 years exactly after that, I was able to redeploy to Afghanistan as a disabled individual with a missing leg and a prosthetic in a war zone as a combatant wearing a uniform, which in many ways, it's not the way you would think a disabled person acts or would be employed. But I was fully employed in a combat position, staff officer, but I could have been called, and I've been called on the road and patrols and things like that during my redeployment. I've been serving since, and I redeployed to Ukraine, and I am fully and gainfully employed with future promotions possible and all that. So and to bring some perspective, my experience is not unique. Nowadays, we have more and more soldiers and some civilians that are sometimes deployed as part of diplomats or development officers that are as well there. So a whole government perspective sometimes get injured as well. And we have, as they say in the famous show, we have the technology now to keep employing us in the rehabilitation. It is up to the person to decide whether they want to still and keep going with this. But in the end, it is quite clear that what disability prevents the person to do has wildly changed. And it's not now an impossibility. It is possible. It is up to the person if they want to do it. So my example is not singular. Many other soldiers and nations have been able to readapt and redeploy soldiers. Some of the main nations would be Canada, the US, UK, mainly for the conflicts in Afghanistan. But right now, France is doing it in the Sahel. Ukraine has been reemploying a lot of soldiers that were injured. So disabled individual serving in a military context is probably part of the future and will challenge now our perception of what disability are only being affected by conflicts as opposed to being part of the conflict. Many questions abound as to what it changes as well in the legal protection afforded, and have been mentioned earlier by other presenters. The legal protections that are afforded to disabled people. What if they take part in the conflicts, either as clothed soldiers with uniforms declared and protected in Geneva Conventions, or paramilitary or unconventional soldiers, or even strictly civilians that are partaking into conflicts or civil wars. In that case, does the protection still abound, especially if technology allows them to be as threatening or physically able as other people, with some difficulties and differences, of course. So soldiers and technology keeps ongoing service. My experience has supported this. It is not for everyone as well. Some people have not made that leap by choice, or physically were not able. There is a limit as well of what we can expect. And that goes into the physical realm as well as in the mental realm. Triple amputees, very, very hard to get them to be still serving or even gainfully employed in society. It's a challenge, it's a constant challenge when you start talking about people with one limb left. Mental injuries, a lot of people are even more crippled than physical injuries through mental injuries. PTSD is the acronym that we're using right now. Some people are managing PTSD and keep serving, but I make the case that sometimes physical rehabilitation is easier because mental one takes longer time. It encompasses a lot of other steps to be done. And redeployment with PTSD has been done and has been done for, well, as far as we can say, shell shock was the term in the First World War, Second World War. Really, it was PTSD. And these people were still employed in the front lines, but we were always risking their lives when we were doing that. So nowadays, when somebody is being suffering from mental health, we try and we strive to try to keep them in a non-combatant version. And to be honest, we don't deploy people that are not fit to serve or would be a danger to themselves if it comes to that. So the impact of conflicts and the medical improvements will only increase the amount of heavily disabled people that we will see. Even though some nations may not have the cutting edge technology, they will try to bring their soldiers back on the line as much as they are able to, with some spreading of technology and capability. The conflict in Syria shows that not only the governmental forces, but the militias as well that are on the ground are reusing some people that are suffering from disability. You can talk about disability being wearing glasses all the way up to amputation, PTSD, things like that. But there's a spectrum, of course, but many nations and many conflicts are going to be more and more inclusive of disabled people, and heavily more so, as we are able to save people that usually would have died from injuries, that now are saved, kept, rehabilitated, and these people, they want to be gainfully employed either in the career they had before or in a new version of that career, or a transition. So now the path that we were having with, or the logical path we had with the veterans, and I guess November 11th tomorrow is Remembrance Day for Canada. I cannot not mention it, but the usual path we knew for veterans was to withdraw from armed forces and join veterans, legions, and these kind of things, and maybe being supported by society as opposed to supporting it. It is changing. It brings me to one other point I want to make, is to fight the perceptions. It is probably one of the hardest things I've done throughout my career. Is people were judging from afar what a disabled person could or could not do based on their perception of it. It was hard for somebody to think that if you're missing a leg, you can still run a half marathon. So we still see it in the news, but it's hard for us to picture a person who months ago was in a wheelchair now wearing a uniform, wearing a combat ballistic vest, and going back into a battlefield. So this battle of perception was probably the hardest thing I had to. Somebody who's disabled who wants to still serve his country, is gonna have to fight that perception battle. That's not even talking about policies that sometimes are not in place. Disabled people serving will be a minority by definition. We will not be a majority, and policies are never well made for minorities. So it will always be, and this is something I fought throughout my career, perceptions and sometimes policies. The last point I'd like to make as well is the use of CBRN weapons. Some of the conflicts we've seen so far, Syria is a good example again, but also in the Sahel, starts to use dirty weapons that you can say dirty bombs, radiological, chemical weapons, bacteriological, and right now we're living in a pandemic, which is natural, but it could be artificially induced. These will create a lot more disabilities, heavy disabilities, unconventional disabilities that we are not used to see from natural causes. And these will probably require an extra burden on healthcare systems across the world, and probably demand as well that we reinforce the laws of military conflicts that we've put in place over so many years, and that we rely on. The Geneva Convention, for me, there's nothing more precious for a soldier than that, because it keeps the game, it keeps the battle civilized, which is something we take for granted nowadays. But as you can see, the conflict with Daesh, the Islamic State, has shown that if you're taken as a prisoner of war, disabled or not, you may, in these kind of conflicts, not be protected as you would have been in past conflicts, such as the Second World War or Korean War or others that were more respectful of the Geneva Convention. There will always be abuse, but I make the case that nowadays the abuses, especially in gray zone conflicts, Africa and Middle East, have shown a lot of disrespect for the Geneva Convention. I think disabled people cannot expect any extra protection because of that. They will be treated very much like everyone else. It's not as well to say that disabled people are not facing difficulties in their path to being gainfully employed and stay inside the forces or their own national armies. Inclusion is not always a given. There will always be some exclusion or wanting to not be having these people that are shocking, different, probably as well challenging to the mind of perception. I wouldn't call it a racism, but a sort of exclusion of that difference that you can see in society, or for most reasons. Well, society, military is a small society, a small community, and sometimes there's a great inclusion. And my experience has been very positive on this. My regiment and my friends and my brothers in arms have all been very welcoming. But sometimes, every now and then, you see this kind of a reflection of refusing to include difference in your neighborhood or in your social circles. This is not new, and I know that. I know it happens to most disabled people. They are facing this kind of change. To mention it as well, disabled people will probably face that in their endeavor to keep serving their country. In conclusion, fighting against perception has been one of my big goals throughout my career. What we think we could have accomplished with an amputee, I want to change that perception. I say that if you want to keep serving your country and you have your heart in the right place for that, there's space for it. And I think we should be prepared to accept this new reality and maybe modify the laws that protect disabled people, but also the inclusion of them inside the new perception of the modern battlefield. It was a quick talk, and I hope my experience could have brought some lights on this, and I welcome questions later. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Major Mailloux. I mean, for sharing your personal experience, and there is incredible value in that, in having that firsthand perspective on all of these issues. I can tell from experience following multilateral processes, whenever you have this personal testimony, this sort of personal testimony, it has been a critical factor in moving the needle and making progress towards strengthening the normative regime, because it generates a visceral reaction. It inspires people, really. And I found particularly inspiring this notion of challenging perceptions of what is and what is not possible. It may not be possible, and what is indeed possible. And I think that's really something for us to take home and think about. Thank you so much. And thank you, of course, for your service.